What's happening, Crypto Land? My name is Phil. This is the Fun with Crypto podcast. We are in season 2, and this is episode 28. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. We're in the middle of the summer, and the weather's gorgeous, and I'm actually taking some time off. So this is a recording that I did prior to my vacation with none other than Dergigi, the writer of the 21 Lessons for Bitcoin. Anyways, I post a link to his website in the show notes, and of course his contact information. It was really, really great to talk to him. He's another person that obviously extremely intelligent, but also, philosophical and totally out there as well. And I really had a fun time talking with him. He's a super cool guy, and I really hope you guys enjoy this interview / discussion. So, without further ado, here is my talk with Dergigi. All right, Crypto Land, we've got a really interesting guest. He wrote the 21 Lessons, and he's got a whole bunch of other really interesting articles. That's actually how I got to know him, was through Citizen Bitcoin's podcast, where they actually went through all 21 lessons, which is a really, really incredible 2-hour plus podcast, which totally dives in. So we're not going to do this with Dergigi. Instead, we're going to take a little bit of a different path for the Fun with Crypto podcast listeners, and we're going to see where this rabbit hole tumbles. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the writer of 21 Lessons, Dergigi. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. And let's see where this goes. I really like the pod. Also like the name Fun with Crypto. I think that's what it's all about. If you're not having fun with Bitcoin, then I don't know what you're doing.
Oh, I totally agree. And obviously it kind of has a bit of a philosophical take on it, So let me ask you this before we get into it. I'd like you to give us your rabbit hole story, because that for regardless of the other material that you've written, that 21 Lessons is, the fact that you chose to put it with Alice in Wonderland, which I get because we all make the rabbit hole reference, but the way in which that you did it, I just find incredible. So I think that there's a serious thinker behind the thought. So I need to know how you got to being you here now.
Oh, well, where to start? Thanks for the compliment, first of all. And I'm really glad that people seem to like it, and I hit some sort of nerve with those 21 lessons. And I think the reason for that is that everyone kind of went through a similar process. It's not necessarily the same process, because depending on your background, you might approach Bitcoin differently, but it feels like an endless hole you fall in. And that's also where the rabbit hole phrase comes from. I don't actually know who first came up with it, but I know that Jameson Lopp has a famous tweet where he says, nobody has found the bottom of the rabbit hole yet. And also, shout out to Marty Bent and Matt Odell from Tales from the Crypt, which do the rabbit hole recap. And so it became a meme, and I actually added the Alice in Wonderland stuff after I wrote the whole piece. So the 21 Lessons started actually as a response to a tweet. And I tried to pack everything I've learned in a single tweet, and that was just impossible. And then I tried to do it in a tweet storm, and that was impossible as well. And then I started putting what I had into a Medium article, and I quickly realized, okay, that won't be one Medium article. It will be multiple articles. And that's how I ended up with 3 Medium articles, which were called what I've learned from falling down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And that was the subtitle of all of them. And I read those articles and split them up and put them on 21lessons.com. And that's where I am now. And I plan to work on it a bit more in the future. So let's see where this goes. It kind of took a life on it, of its own. But there is also an audio version now. So shout out as well to Guys One from the Cryptoconomy podcast, who was kind enough to read that and lend his awesome soothing voice to the 21 Lessons. He's an amazing speaker and reads a lot of Bitcoin stuff. And I'm very humbled that he read my stuff too, and I was allowed to use that. And yeah, that's the short story for the 21 lessons, but I didn't really talk about me, did I?
Yeah, exactly. But I just want to add, before you do talk about you a bit, I just want to add for Guy Swan, I listened to that as well. And it definitely, I really appreciate the audio version that he did. He totally,
yeah, he's a blessing for the space, because I listen to, like, most of the stuff I consume with audio. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I also use text to speech a lot, actually. And Guy is just amazing because he also does an excellent curation of what to read, and then he reads it really well. And yeah, again, he's a blessing to the space, and everyone should support him in any way possible.
Oh yeah, definitely agreed. So shout out to Guy Swan. You know what? We'll put a link to his podcast in this as well, with with the material from your website. But so let's go back to before you wrote 21 lessons.
My rabbit hole story.
That's it, your rabbit hole story. So before Bitcoin, there was Gigi, and like, how did he get to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I don't know. Looking back, it almost seems like a straight path, and I kick myself daily for not realizing what Bitcoin is earlier. So I studied computer science, and I'm into computers and computer science since forever, basically. But so my dad worked with computers as well, and I just grew up around computers. And in the early 90s, me and my friends, we always just built computers and did a lot of LAN parties, and I was big into gaming. And if you were trying to get a LAN party going in the early 90s, like 93, 94, when like Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2 was a thing.
Oh yeah.
And that's really something, I mean, you basically had to set everything up by hand, and also just connect, for example, the token ring networks correctly. And if you are missing an end piece, or you have some static in your body and you touch a networking card, the whole network is fried. And so fun times. That's where what I did when I was younger. And I ended up studying computer science, and worked in software for the last 10 plus years. And I was in research for a while. So I was a researcher for the semantic web, and did some, I did the stuff on the academic side that Google is now doing in real life. Like, they're building a knowledge graph and teaching computers how to understand the world. And I worked on the theoretical part of that for a bit, like knowledge reasoning and stuff. So I have somewhat of an academic background, which obviously helps in crypto as well, because you can quickly tell by just looking at white papers and reading through it if it's bullshit or not, or if there's something there. And as I said before, I'm kicking myself daily, because some of my research friends I think it was like 2014 or so, they were already building shitcoins, and they were into crypto already. And I was just laughing at them all the time, because I just thought it's so stupid, and it's stupid internet money, and it will never work. and yeah, the usual arguments, just wait until the government comes and shuts it down and so on. And it took me many attempted falls into the rabbit hole until I really fell in. Like, it took me, I think, 3 or 4 touches with Bitcoin until I had a deeper look. And it was just, it's the same story that you hear from many different people. Then another friend came, and he told me about Bitcoin, and then some of my friends got fucked by Mt. Gox, and I was like, okay, that's really interesting. That's a completely different set of people, no computer scientists at all. They were just into speculation and trying to get rich quick. And I think it was around 2015 when I really had the first closer look, but still not really a more serious look. And it took me a while to get my skin in the game and really take this thing seriously. And that was also the main motivation then, after I Yeah, sort of. I ended up becoming a Bitcoin maximalist. I had my shitcoin phase as well, and
Nice.
I'm not I'm not ashamed to say that, and I said that publicly before.
Cool.
I was into Ethereum for like well over a year, and I was just enthralled by the promise of unstoppable code and the world computer and so on and so forth. And now it's different. Now there are different talking points in the Ethereum camp, but it used to be unstoppable code. And as we all have seen, the code wasn't unstoppable after all. So if the right people come together and decide to stop the code, then that's perfectly possible in the Ethereum world. And I don't think it's possible in the Bitcoin world, at least not as easily. And understanding Bitcoin taught me a lot of things, and I just wanted to share that with a wider audience and also try to put it in a format that's not technical. Let's put it that way. That theoretically, if you're really interested in it, you can understand it without having studied anything. So that was my main motivation.
I definitely think you achieved that. So you mentioned something just before about how, like, during your journey, the people that initially got you touching Bitcoin were, computer scientists, researchers, and the such. But then you saw what happened with Mount Gox, and that it was, more speculators and stuff like that. And then, of course, as we all know, there's also the other side of, of Bitcoin, which is, people using it for things that, require less friction, we'll say. Or the least friction possible. So we have all these different types of people like coming to Bitcoin. It's very interesting. Like I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you've picked up on this, and I believe that based on your writings, you have a philosophical standpoint of Bitcoin. Like it seems to touch people in different ways. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there are many, many ways that can lead you to Bitcoin. And as far as I can tell, the big groups are technologists that are just interested in internet stuff and distributed systems and things like that. And those tend to also be interested in Ethereum and other projects, as far as I can tell, because it's just, from a pure tech perspective, without thinking about economics or anything else, that might look interesting. And the other side would be the finance guys. And we have a nice overlap. You can see that clearly on Twitter. You have Bitcoin Twitter and crypto Twitter, and you have also finance Twitter. And, all the gold bugs and all the, also speculators and traders, but also just old school Austrian economists that discover Bitcoin, and they immediately realize, okay, this is it. I mean, guys like Bitstein, Michael Goldstein and Pierre Rochard, and they read like 15 books of the Mises Institute before they discovered Bitcoin. And when they discovered Bitcoin, they were like, okay, yeah, that's obviously the soundest money we ever had. And that's why it's valuable for them. And you have other people like, for example, Peter McCormack is a nice example. He had to use Bitcoin to get medicine for his mom. And I think there are many people that stumble into Bitcoin out of necessity, because you need to transfer money out of your failing country, for example, or you need to get some substance that is illegal in your jurisdiction. And again, I think many roads lead to Bitcoin. For me, as you correctly said, the philosophical questions and thus also the implications it brings with it are the most interesting things. And I had a huge interest in that already, but not related to Bitcoin, but related to the internet. I think the internet changed society completely, and I think it's super fascinating. And I think it's also obvious now in hindsight, but there were people in the 70s and 80s already that kind of predicted that. And we now have the same thing with cypherpunks predicting anonymous payment systems and digital cash and so on and so forth. And now we have that. And they already thought about societal implications of that. And I think it's fascinating to just think about that a little bit further, and how a future could look like, and how society could change in a world where Bitcoin isn't only a thing, but also it's as widely used as the internet is now.
Okay, so let's go there. Okay. So let me ask you this. Have you ever seen the movie Ready Player One?
Oh, I have. Yeah, I even have read the book.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so I mean, like like I'm sure, don't get me wrong. Like when I saw that movie, especially being into Bitcoin, like I pretty much got like goosebumps, like because that's like that's
Yeah,
exactly. And I'm not even a gamer, but you don't even need to be. Like you see what the future,
yeah,
can be.
and no, that future is already here. I mean, we have a real world version of that now with Satoshi's treasure, and I think those are exactly the things that I find most interesting, because that's something you just wouldn't be able to do with regular cash or with anything else. It just wouldn't work, and other things like Satoshi's place, or selling art for the lowest bidder, which was like the value of a grain of sand. That's really fascinating to me. And if you think about what could work in the future, it's really fascinating. I mean, we all kind of know now what we can do with the internet, even though I think that the internet is still quite young, and we will be continually surprised how people figure out what services to provide on the internet. And I mean, just look at what Amazon did, and what Google did and is doing. 20 years ago, that was just an utopia almost. Nobody would have thought that it would go this way, or not that fast, at least. I think. And if you stay in the Bitcoin world, it's just insane. If you have people like Andreas Antonopoulos now talk about streaming money, and that's a real thing. I mean, it kind of exists now. It doesn't work perfectly yet, and there's still a lot of work to be done. But just imagine what you can do with a concept like streaming money, and what you can do with autonomous vehicles and autonomous drones, and just also autonomous bots online, like software bots that have a salary, and they get paid, and they host themselves, and they spend the money wisely or not. If they don't spend it wisely, they go bankrupt, and it will be a bad bot. But if it's a good bot, it will get upvotes, and it will get some money, and it can do its thing. And it's a weird world, but I would argue it's not weirder than the world we are already living in, because we haven't met each other yet. We know each other from Twitter. I mean,
That's
we
true.
don't even know our real names, and and now we're talking about crazy things. And yeah, I don't know how many people will listen to this, but it's basically, the potential is that hundreds of thousands of people will listen to this conversation over the next couple of years. And that's kind of insane, just like the smartphone in your pocket is completely insane, and what you can do with it. And for me, the main reason to be hyper bullish on Bitcoin is that I lived through the rise of the internet and saw how quickly things can change in a very, very short period of time. And it's not only the internet, it's also mobile computing. I mean, the smartphone market didn't exist 15 years ago, and look where we are now. And it's so insane, it's so insane. Everyone takes for granted now that you have a thin piece of glass in your pocket and can do pretty much everything with it. You can run a company with it. You can do everything you want with it, pretty much. And I think a similar transformation, even more radical, will happen in the next maybe not even 10 years. I have no idea how long it will take, but I think when people on Bitcoin Twitter talk about the next 30 years or 50 years or so, I think they underestimate the potential of exponential technologies. I think just look at the halvings. Next year we'll have the next halving, and then it will be 4 years for the next one, and again 4 years for that. So my time horizon will be 9 years from today. And I think in the next 9 years, things will be so crazy you can't even imagine. I think the bull run, which I think we are already in now, will be so crazy it will pop people's heads off.
I totally agree.
It will be insane. It will be fun to watch, though. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I want to go back to something that you said before when you were talking about Andreas Antonopoulos, and like how weird it can be. There's actually two things I want to go back to. It's that and also another piece the technology changing, but the first part is for that for things getting weird. I think like like what I was saying to you before, right? Like it's like the times themselves are getting weirder. Like like the things that and the things that were fringe in the like in the 90s are today like almost considered cool. Like if you think about it, like I remember growing up like as a kid, like in the 90s, if you got your earlobes stretched or something like that, like that was like out there. But today, that's like that. It's way more accepted. Yeah. Like that's like a normal thing. They don't even know why they're stretching their earlobes. They don't even know where that comes from. The symbolism of stretching your ears or doing any of those piercings. So, so I think like we're the fringe is becoming the norm. What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not too long ago, having tattoos was out there, and like my grandma wouldn't have approved, yeah, I don't know. It's really weird. I kind of like it because I don't know. As I said, I was always in computers, but I kind of was lucky because I'm living somewhat of a double life. I'm a full-on nerd and I studied computer science, as I said, but I'm also a skateboarder and I started skateboarding when I was like 3 years old. So I've been a skateboarder all my life and I've been windsurfing and doing other stuff. And so I have like two sets of people, the ones that know me as the computer guy and the other ones that know me as the skateboarder kind of guy. And most people don't know that I'm having another life. And I see that all over the place now. If you look at internet task force conferences, for example, and pictures of that, if you look at the history of how the internet evolved, all of the guys, they were really weird looking, they were like their own kind of people. And,
oh yeah.
It was really like basement dwellers and neckbeards all over the place. And if you contrast that now to the high tech sector and people working in tech, most of them are kind of normal people. You know what I mean? You couldn't really tell 30 years ago or so. You could absolutely tell.
Oh yeah.
in the software world, at least. And I was having a chat with Matt Odell and Alex Smetsky yesterday, and I think it was Alex that said, I don't remember, I might have that mixed up, but someone's girlfriend said saw a video of a Bitcoin conference or something, and there was someone presenting some really high-tech stuff about, I don't know, maybe Bitcoin script language or something, and she was like, hey, that guy's actually good looking. I didn't even know that this existed, So I think you're right that the fringe is becoming more mainstream, and also more mainstream quote unquote people and more normal people just get involved with all these quote unquote weird things, the weird Bitcoin world and the weird internet world and internet protocols world. And now we have Bitcoin and Lightning is kind of cool, and young people are building Lightning apps and working on the protocol even, and they're just regular people trying to do their thing and make the internet payment world a better place, I would say.
I totally agree. And actually, I want to go back to something you said. It's interesting because I also grew up similarly in that way, skateboarding and snowboarding. And because we don't really have surfing in Canada, well, maybe in British Columbia, but I grew up in Montreal, so there was no surfing. So yeah, snowboarding and skateboarding, and then when I got to 18, I went into network administration. So I became that computer person, not nearly as good as you in computers in that sense. But I became that computer person on one side and the skateboarding, snowboarding person on the other. So it's interesting because I find it that they're both solo sports. You're always in competition with yourself. When I would sit there and work on a project, it's like I'm not competing with anybody else. I'm trying to see if I can get this done. So it's I think it's like a certain type of personality, very self-driven.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people who work in this space, or also a lot of people who study computer science that I know also do climbing, for example, which is again similar idea.
Yes.
Your biggest enemy is yourself, and you're trying to solve problems in a way, and the only one who stands in between you and the solution of the problem is yourself. And that's it's the same thing with programming. I mean, that's how it is.
It's so true. And it's interesting that you bring up climbing and mountaineering, because that is like, especially when it comes to mindfulness and stuff like that. And in terms of self-challenge, that is one of those activities that always gets brought up. You know, like you have like these fantastic thinkers, and you go read what their pastimes are, and for some reason, you know, mountaineering and climbing always pop up.
Yeah, it's also a very nice way to clear your head. I mean, if you're hanging on a 50-foot high wall and you know, trying to
think
an overhang, then your mind will be very, very clear in a way.
You're going to be focused.
Yeah, it's a kind of meditation as well, a forceful meditation.
So I also want to go back to okay, I don't know how old you are, but I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in 1979, and this is going back to a comment you just made about, you know, like about seeing tech as you grew up. Like, you know, when we grew up, you know, the biggest tech we had in a classroom was a calculator, and you weren't allowed to have a calculator. Like I remember, like when I came into school, we were still at that point where there was, you know, one classroom that had 1 to 3 computers. And like, if you were really good, you could get time on that computer. You know, so like, it's like, and think about it, right? Like you talked about the smartphone and like how people,
yeah, sure.
You know, people,
it's not a long time at all.
It's not like it's like no time. Like I remember seeing you know, my uncle pull out like his first cell phone that was, you know, the size of a keyboard.
Yeah,
you know, it's like that's. I mean, people don't really get the exponential growth. So I mean, I guess like, are you a child of the 80s or a little bit earlier?
Yeah,
or a little later?
we're about. I'm a little bit younger than you, but we're about the same age, and I saw the same development than you did, and it's even worse in a way because you know, I'm from Austria, and Austria is like 20 years behind in terms of tech development most of the time, and so all we had in our school was typewriters to learn the proper writing style, to use all 10 fingers, to be prepared then for
wow.
the real world where you might get a computer, and then it's of good use, you know. So I learned typing properly on typewriters when I was, I don't know, maybe like 9 years old or 10 years old. We started really early, but we only had typewriters. And it was the same thing with the calculators you mentioned. It's funny how that changed, right? Like you were just not allowed to use it at all. And also when I started studying on university, I don't know if that changed, but you were not allowed to use Google or the internet for research, really, or cite Wikipedia. I mean, citing Wikipedia is, you actually shouldn't really do that, but the internet is actually a really good research tool. And it's insane that on universities, at least when I studied there, which it's quite a while ago, but still they were like, don't use that. You have to go to the library, and you have to get the books, and you have to do all of that, quote unquote, properly, and so on and so forth. And I feel like history just keeps repeating itself in a way, or it at least rhymes, as they say, because now some of my friends, for example, they are outraged that children aren't learning to write properly anymore, like you know, the cursive writing style. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I kind of get where you're coming from, because I'm in the same generation, and I like writing, and I learned writing in the same way that everyone else did. But you know, who's gonna write anymore? I mean, everyone's using smartphones and keyboards and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like it will be a lost art soon. And just like I can't do stenography anymore, for example, and my grandma was forced to learn that, the old things will just die out. And to bring it back to Bitcoin, I mean, we're now 10 years in, and the generation that is going to grow up with Bitcoin or is already growing up in a world where Bitcoin exists, I don't think they will use money in the same way that we did. And even if it's not Bitcoin, I mean, they all play Fortnite and they use V-Bucks and they know that digital money exists, and they will kind of demand something that works in that way. You just, like, we are not sending letters. Our generation is not really sending letters anymore. You send emails and IMs and other stuff. And I think younger people just will not send money in the conventional way anymore. They will just demand it to be digital and instant and so on and so forth. And Andreas talks about that a lot, way more eloquently than I ever could. But I think it's profoundly true.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I just want to touch back on a point you just made. So, you know, like, everybody's used to already playing games, and, you know, there's Farmville, and, you know, like, there's all these different, unfortunately, you know, these garbage currencies and whatnot. But I think that because the new generation, so first of all, they're I shouldn't even call them a, like, really new generation, but, like, let's say, you know, everybody, I guess, like 20 and younger, you know, these people are growing up in this age, and for some reason they seem to be less the type that are like collectors in the sense of, like, you know, housing and boats and stuff like that. Like, this is more like old school. It's like it's not that they have less, but they want to live differently. And as a result, if you're living differently, you know, if you're going to accumulate wealth or anything like that, the easiest way to do it is digitally, and that you can carry it everywhere. So there's, like, I think there's different qualities of that digital wealth. And I think that that's what we're going to end up seeing, is that, you know, as more people get, you know, quote unquote digitized, they're going to want the highest quality of digital, you know, of digital store of value that can be had. And this is where Bitcoin comes in.
Yeah, I agree. And I kind of experienced this firsthand. So in the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, I felt how my life became more and more digital in a way. And like, most of my life is in cyberspace and not in meat space. And I think the only thing that really didn't exist purely in cyberspace was value. But for example, all my memorabilia, or most of them, like pictures and videos and other stuff. I mean, I have plenty of screenshots, for example, that are just dear to me because they are like almost 20 years old. You know, you know what I mean? Like LAN party screenshots, and also photographs. And
oh, for sure,
it's just not. I mean, I don't see the point in having all of that in a physical form if I can have it digitally, because I will look at it no matter if it's digital or physical. And some people, they kind of have a very romanticized idea of the physical stuff, also with books, for example. And don't get me wrong, I really love books, and I also love physical books. And I also love physical photographs. I mean, I'm into photography, and I do printouts from time to time, and it is different if you have it in your hands or if you just have it digitally. But, you know, in the last couple of years, I moved like 5 or 6 times. And in the last 10 years, I got rid of almost all of my belongings twice, because just it's easier that way. You know, I traveled a lot, and I was just like, okay, that's it. I'm selling all my stuff. And yeah, I'm just moving to the digital realm in a way and digitizing everything. And I think that will become more and more normal. I mean, many people that will hear that think, okay, this guy's crazy, and I would never do that. But it's very convenient also if you do it in the right way. And what you said, they will flock to the best store of value in a way. I agree that this is true for not only for value, but also maybe you don't want to store all your documents on one provider, for example, and upload them to Facebook, because if something happens to Facebook or what have you, then all your stuff is gone. So you need to do it in a way that's self-sovereign. And I think understanding that and realizing that is very important and very helpful. And I think, yeah, as Matt Odell says all the time, people need to get burned to learn. So if you have a bunch of important data and you lose it because, I don't know, Dropbox goes out of business or something, then you will learn. I really like the saying, you know, there are only 2 types of people in the world: those who make backups regularly, and those who will make backups regularly. So.
It's so true.
It sums it up.
It is absolutely true. And it really does only take getting burnt. I think anyways, it only takes getting burnt once.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you're smart.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if you're. I wouldn't. I don't know. I don't know if it's smart or not. But if you're a quick learner, then maybe getting burned once is enough. But some people, I think, also if you look at the shitcoin space, it seems that some people just need to get burned like over and over and over again by shitcoins, and then maybe they will come back to something that's real and has real value.
It's absolutely brutal. It really is. And you just keep seeing the same stories coming out, again and again. And you don't understand how it's like, if none of this worked before, why is it working now? It's not.
Yeah, I think that's also why a lot of the maximalists are so toxic, because they have just experienced it firsthand, most of them, and not only once, but multiple times. And it's just the same arguments and the same selling points and the same scams all over again, all the time. And but it's difficult to handle, because I really like what you said in one of your previous podcasts. You said everybody is a noob at some point, and I totally agree. I mean, nobody knows anything about the space from day one, and you are simply a noob at some point, and have to learn. And it just gets annoying if people don't really want to learn or are willfully ignorant. And also, what I think really drives most of the maximalists nuts is that some scammers also just stay willfully ignorant and don't believe that their thing is a scam, for example. Or even worse, they know when they are outright lying to people and scamming people. And I totally get the toxicity. And I think also as Bitcoiners, we should kind of embrace it. I mean, but there is a fine line between having a healthy immune system and having an autoimmune disease. So it's a delicate balance.
It is a delicate balance. And you know what? I'm obviously biased, but I always feel that Bitcoin is being attacked. Like, I don't feel that we're going out and actively telling people that shitcoins are garbage. We're having to go out and say that because they're trying to pretend that they're better than Bitcoin. Like, it's like Bitcoin doesn't make its use case by saying, hey, I'm better than ETH. That's my use case. Like, it's like, but that's part of theirs. It's like that's a lot of shitcoins. It's like, we do transactions faster. It's like, faster than what? Like, it's just, I don't know. I always feel like, and to your point, I think that's why Bitcoiners become so toxic, because you're not sitting there. Like, if they would sit there and actually maybe shill their project on its actual virtues, not competition wise, but simply, hey, this is what we do and we think we do it better, maybe it wouldn't be so adversarial. But they're constantly thinking that they need to be better when they don't realize that it's just a side project. We're still trying to get money right. You're like, it's like they're all the way on some other, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, you know what it is? One of the guys that I work with made this kind of analogy. It's like you're building an airplane in the sky. Like, that's not going to happen.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. I think, I also heard people describing it as like building skyscrapers on top of skyscrapers. And,
exactly.
That's kind of how they're trying to go about it. But I think that most of the people really miss the biggest innovation, which, as you said, is getting money right. And I think a lot of the projects just simply ignore the money aspect at all and ignore the monetary and economic aspect completely. And I think that's the biggest innovation. And that's also why I think it took me such a long time to grasp Bitcoin and wrap my head around everything, because I have no training at all in economics, and I had also no interest in it at all. And I just looked at it from a purely technical perspective. And I think that's simply wrong. It's not purely a technical thing. It's most of all a monetary phenomenon. And I think a lot of shitcoiners just don't get that. And you can build the most amazing technology in such a system. If you don't get the monetary policies and the monetary aspect of the system right, then you just you lost from the first second. It will never work, because the whole incentive structure and the monetary part and the economic part is it's what makes everything work.
Oh yeah.
And if your token doesn't have any value or can't keep value, and if you can't convince the masses that this thing has value, then your project will die. And I think since we have a token that has value, we have Satoshis, pretty much everything you can think of from the technical perspective can be built up on this token, and you don't need a separate token. You will revert back to a shitcoin barter economy, and you don't need that. We have money now, and we have the best money that ever existed, and I urge everyone to just build up on that and don't try to reinvent the wheel and think you're having a better wheel because it's not round. It has like 15 sides.
Speaking of reinventing the wheel in shitcoins, we're going to obviously have to give a tribute to the biggest shitcoin that's coming, Libra coin. Okay. I mean, obviously, I think, I mean, you're probably, I feel like you'd be in the same camp as me. I obviously don't see it as any kind of competition to Bitcoin, because I understand Bitcoin well enough to say that something like Libra coin wouldn't be competition, because it's completely different. And I don't even know if we could classify it as a cryptocurrency, because even in their white paper, they just classify it as a database. So, yeah. But besides that, I mean, so what do you think? Like, I'm seeing, a couple of different schools of thought. Some people think it's, it's a good thing for Bitcoin because it's going to bring, 2.8 million people. I personally think it's going to be 2.8 billion shitcoiners that we instantly have to educate.
Yeah, but still it might be good. There will be like 2.8 billion people that get burned, and maybe some of them stick around and come back to Bitcoin. I don't know. I don't know what to think of it. I think let's just wait and see, because for me, it's not clear that it will even launch, because the regulators are already up Facebook's ass, and they are having a very, very close look at the consortium and what they are trying to do. For now, all that launched is a weird centralized testnet and a quote unquote white paper, which, as you said, it doesn't have anything to do with cryptocurrency. They just use it as a marketing term. It's just a database, and I think they went out on a limb, and they are trying to roll their own money. And I'm not sure if the US and the other powers that be will just look at that and say, hey, yeah, okay, Mark Zuckerberg, what you're trying to do, that's cool. We're cool with it. I don't think that it will be smooth sailing for the Facebook coin and for Libra, but it's hard for me to tell if it's positive or negative. I see it in that way that Honey Badger don't care. Everything's kind of positive for Bitcoin. It just doesn't really matter. Bitcoin will continue to do its thing, and my hope is that if Libra launches, that a lot of people will have to ask themselves some hard questions. And those are questions that we as Bitcoiners ask ourselves the last couple of years or months, or however long you are into Bitcoin. It's like, what is money, and why does money have value? Why does this thing now have value, even though it has nothing to do with my government shitcoin? Like it's backed by a basket of currencies and so on and so forth. But I think just having, even if it's like just 1% of people, if it's 2.5 or 2.8 billion users in the whole Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram ecosystem, if just like, even if it's below 1%, that will be a lot of potential future Bitcoiners. And I think that can only be good. And some people say, yeah, it may be something like a Trojan horse for Bitcoin. I'm not sure. I would say, let's see. But in regards to the plan that they have of having a stable coin pegged to pegged to multiple assets, let's see how stable it will be in the next 10 or 15 years. I don't believe in stable coins at all. And
Me neither.
I think that, yeah, if you look at the geopolitical landscape and the macroeconomic landscape, I think the next 10 years will be very, very interesting. And that's completely separate from Bitcoin. And as I said before, my time horizon for Bitcoin is like 9 years, something like that. And combine that with everything that's going on in the world, I think it will be very interesting to say the least. And if Libra launches and they have stablecoin, let's see how it performs versus Bitcoin. I don't think it will perform well.
Yeah, I really like your take though, because I think it's more objective. I mean, I try to be objective, but I just have a hard time because it's Facebook. But I think you're right, and I like the way that you look at it. Like, let's wait and see. I definitely, I mean, at the very least, that's the best way to look at it, and to your point, they don't really have that much out there right now at all. So
yeah, and don't get me wrong, I don't think this stuff like that should be underestimated, because if you look to China, for example, and if you look at what WeChat did, and I think Facebook in a way tries to emulate the WeChat playbook, and WeChat just made it very attractive to put real money into the app, and they have their own in-game currency, quote unquote, in the apps,
right.
and you just use that all the time, and you're in this WeChat ecosystem, and you don't need real money anymore. So basically, in China, what people on a daily basis use as money is WeChat money, and if Facebook manages that, then that's a big deal. But let's see if they manage that, and I think Facebook is kind of in a way dying anyway. I mean, young people don't use Facebook really. Okay, granted, they use WhatsApp and Instagram maybe, but Facebook is for old people, and it's kind of dying. It's not hip and cool anymore. And a lot of people are waking up that global surveillance and like the not only the surveillance state, but also all the companies like Facebook and Google monitoring everything you do all the time isn't really cool. And I think people are starting to wake up to that. And we have a lot of censorship and demonetization and deplatforming going on YouTube, and also on Twitter, also on Facebook, and so on and so forth. And I think that more robust and censorship resistant solutions will be more appealing over time, especially if there is something like political or even global unrest. And for example, you're trying to set up a meeting to discuss politics, and you're not allowed to by Facebook because it's not the politics that Facebook believes in, then I think people will get mad very quickly and use different services.
Oh, I totally agree. And I mean, they're already doing stuff like that. So I think it's just going to get worse, so yeah, it's definitely a slippery slope. And I mean, to your point, though, about WeChat, people don't even have to leave the ecosystem, and they can do everything in it. And Facebook, as unhip and as uncool as it is, does have a complete platform for doing all of that. So it's like, I mean, it's not to say that a brand can't bring itself back to life. I mean, technically Apple,
that's true.
Technically Apple did that. If you think about it, with the iPod and whatnot, but I think it might be a lot tougher for Facebook because it's just software. So anybody else can make better software and make a better platform, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
If they really want.
I think if they want to like resurrect themselves, they really have to pivot hard. And I think they're already trying to do that. And they're now telling everyone that, we actually really do care about your privacy and so on and so forth. I mean, I think it's laughable. And if people want to believe that, then they should believe it and make a deal with the devil. But I would urge everyone who is listening to that to just delete Facebook, and while you're at it, just delete Coinbase as well. So that's my tip for that. And I really like, since you said Apple resurrected itself. I think what Apple is doing is really cool, since their business model isn't based on surveillance. They have an incentive of really caring about the privacy of their users. And I'm not an Apple fanboy by any stretch of the imagination. Like, not at all. I don't like walled gardens, no matter how plated with gold they are. But it's interesting that one of the biggest companies in the world now goes this route and tells governments to fuck off if they come knocking at the door and say, hey, please encrypt this iPhone, like decrypt this iPhone. And Apple is doing some cool things where they now introduce like something like temporary identities, where when you sign up to a service, they generate a temporary email address for you, and everything's encrypted by default, and only you control the keys, and so on and so forth. So I think it's going in the right direction, and I also think that a lot of companies are doing awesome things. And if you look at what Casa Hodl is doing, and all the nodes that are coming out now, where you really have self-sovereign ownership of your data and of your of your coins as well, and of your nodes. I think that's the way to go. And there is also in the non-Bitcoin world, there are some cool solutions. I mean, you can get a Synology, for example, and just replicate everything that Google is doing for you locally for yourself on your home box. And I think it will be important that enough people do that. And I think a lot of education and a lot of development still needs to be done. But I think I see so many positive developments that I tend to be optimistic. So that's one side effect that Bitcoin had on me. I was really pessimistic for, I don't know when it started, but I was at a very bad state, and Bitcoin made me very optimistic because so many awesome people are working on awesome stuff and are working on the right thing, in my opinion. And I think a bright future lies ahead.
I totally agree, and I have to say I felt the same way about being slightly pessimistic prior to Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin raised my hopes again about humanity, because I had pretty much given up and was, just doing like dividend reinvestment on boring stocks. And I'm like, well, that's it. This is pretty much the best I can hope for, because I'm not going to be a trader. And it's, in that sense. And even in terms of technology, I had personally, not just the finance side, but even like so when I first got into tech, like I actually wrote an article for the Hacker Quarterly, the 2600. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
No, I haven't, but make sure to send me a link. I'd like to read it.
Oh, cool. So yeah, no, it's an article that I wrote probably like 20 years ago or something. So it's about
doesn't matter.
Okay, cool. It's about setting up a free FTP server behind your firewall. Anyways, so like, but it's like I was super passionate, and I was all excited, like about hacking and about networks and stuff like that. And then, and it's my own fault. Like, I got super bored, and like Bitcoin got me excited again, like building nodes and, like tinkering with stuff and like trying to solve an issue or trying to create something cool. Like it's like a call to arms, it's like anything you can do. It's like, go and do it. Do it.
Exactly.
Go and do it for Bitcoin.
Yeah. And I also think there's something like a perfect storm that happened in the last couple of years, because, all the people like Richard Stallman, and other free software folks that were very, very paranoid and just told you for the last 20 years or so that every single computer you have is spying on you, and every internet connected device is spying on you all the time. And if you buy a phone and it has a camera and a microphone, you can't be sure that it's on all the time and it's spying on you all the time. And all the people were laughing at them. I mean, Richard Stallman had a really, in a way, a bad reputation, especially in the general public. I mean, nobody in the general public knows them, but if you're not into free software, then you kind of had to laugh at the hippie, and it's like, oh yeah, he's a paranoid hippie and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And since Edward Snowden, we know that all of those people, they were right. And I think that everyone who is into technology knows that now. And everyone who is working in Bitcoin and on Lightning and on related things, everyone kind of knows that now. And a lot of smart people are making sure that, at least from a technological perspective, we're trying to create a better world where it's not as easily possible to be surveilled 24/7, and we're just putting the user back in control. And I think that's very, very important.
I totally agree. So, actually, going along the lines of security, we're actually coming up on an hour, but I feel like I can go on forever with you, Dergigi. Tell me, what do you think? Like, are there any narratives that you see going around Bitcoin that may be dangerous to Bitcoin? I know that probably like maybe 4 or 5 months ago on Twitter, and I can't name call because I don't recall who actually wrote this, but I recall seeing tweets about, talk about getting privacy onto the base layer. And I'm not talking about Schnorr signatures. I don't see Schnorr signatures as an attack. I obviously see it as a benefit. But I'm talking about, people saying that, oh, well, Bitcoin should have privacy at the base layer, but in doing so, it would obfuscate that 21 million cap. We wouldn't be able to verify that 21 million cap based on, certain privacy measures. So I don't know. Do you see any narratives going around right now that are seen as dangerous to Bitcoin, type of stuff like that? Because I consider that type of stuff dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, there are many narratives floating around, but in the end, I think Bitcoin is fine as it is, and it doesn't really care, and it will continue to work. But what you just said with putting privacy on the base layer, it's obviously you can't have the best of both worlds. You kind of need to make a trade-off somewhere, because you will want to have perfect auditability and something that's not that's not too complicated, that just people and full node operators can make sure that all the transactions are in order and the supply doesn't get inflated. And we saw that in Zcash actually, where they had an inflation bug in their shielded pool. And Matt talked about it yesterday, and I think his comment was accurate. The reason why there was no outcry is because nobody's using Zcash, basically, and if that would happen in Bitcoin, that would be kind of catastrophic, because one of the main selling points is the 21 million hard cap. And if something's wrong with that, then I think that will be a huge blow to the trust in Bitcoin and in the in the essence and soul of Bitcoin in a way. And of course, you want to have privacy as well. But I see so many positive developments there. As you said, Schnorr signatures will add some level of privacy to the base layer, and I think Lightning is just awesome. I mean, I tend to agree with Pierre Rochard, who says that pretty much all the economic activity will eventually be on Lightning. And I agree with that, even if it's not Lightning, like it won't be on the base layer. I mean, the base layer just doesn't scale. Everyone should know that by now. And I think the base layer is, like the container ship. I really love the container ship analogy because it's so perfect in so many ways. And it's not about, you can't have the perfect system. You need to make some trade-offs. And one of the trade-offs we have on the base layer is that it's better to have perfect auditability than perfect privacy. But that doesn't mean that we don't have privacy. I mean, you can use Bitcoin in a private manner if you know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
And it's just a matter of automating that. And I think so many awesome people are working on that. It will just be a matter of time, but I think it will go very, very quickly. For example, Bull Bitcoin now has privacy by default. They use Wasabi to coin join everything that comes in and out of the system. And if you just do that as an exchange or as whatever you're doing, whatever service you're providing, then that's perfect already. And I think every wallet will have privacy features in the future. And I hope that people demand it. I think people will demand it. And it will be so easy to implement and use that it will just be a no-brainer, just like HTTPS is now on the internet.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, and to your point, if we go back and look at, let's say, something like the internet, especially going back to the early 90s and, the mid 80s, I mean, people didn't really see it for what it was because it was just building on top of layers. And the base layer, of course, TCP IP, it's all of this is built up on top of it. And I'm sure we can go back and find people who thought, who found all the shortcomings of it. And yet here we are, 25 years later.
The internet didn't scale at all. Like it
Exactly.
never did. You know, it was always on maximum capacity. It was always,
Look,
and it still is kind of, you know.
I still
It's
do you remember downloading songs? You had
yeah, sure.
56K. You know, like I mean, I remember downloading a 6 megabyte song that I waited 2 hours for. Like people
Yeah,
have
I
no
mean,
idea what that's like today.
yeah, the first modems we had were measured in baud, you know, and so
9600. I
yeah.
still remember.
You load some text, or not even the image, and the text goes in line by line, and the images was like, you know, you wait 5 minutes and it goes in pixel by pixel. So yeah,
And then
it's insane how much the world has changed in just a couple of years.
and you remember, like, you know, like getting connected, right? You had to go and, like, at some cases, like, people most likely listening to this podcast will hopefully not know this pain, but like you actually had to go and choose an interrupt request address, otherwise
Yeah.
the modem wouldn't work. Like it's
Yeah.
like people don't understand like what we used to go through, and back then it was like, yeah, no one's ever going to use this. It's just
Yeah,
for
yeah,
tinkers
exactly.
and, you know, and geeks.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And I think we're already further ahead in Bitcoin. I think everything is moving
way ahead.
way faster, and I think that you just see that. And I think in my last lesson, which is called Metaphors for Bitcoin's Future, I went into detail there, and it's just everything that's built on top of other networks feeds on the network effects of the network below.
Yes.
Like electricity took a long time to develop because you had to build the electrical grid, and you actually
There
had
was
to
no network effect.
yeah, you had to invent things so that you can put electricity to good use. But and then the same with telephone lines and everything else. Building out the internet, since it used telephone lines, it went rather quickly. And now we are in a world where you can launch an app like Snapchat, and I don't know, 3 months later you have 1 billion users, and it's. I see such a bright future for Bitcoin and Lightning because of that reason. Because whenever there is a breakthrough, it will just be like wildfire, and everyone will have this new app, and everyone will use, for example, Schnorr and other things that are getting developed. And I think we are going through the same cycle as we did with, you know, dial-up modems and everything else, but it goes just way quicker. And I wouldn't be surprised that, as I said, in the next 9 years or so, everyone would be using Bitcoin without even noticing it, just like everyone is using TCP/IP now. And unless you studied this stuff, you have no idea what TCP/IP is.
Yes, it's it absolutely. And let's face it, nobody needs to know what it is anymore.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
except for those of us using it in that way or at that level. Okay, so tell me, are there any new articles or anything that you'd like to share that you're working on, or new ideas that you're working on? Obviously, not give too much details, you know, but something you want to tease us with.
I'm always working on a bunch of things, I'm still working on the 21 lessons because I have a section at the bottom of each lesson which is called Down the Rabbit Hole, and I'm doing my best to collect interesting and fitting articles and podcast episodes and so on to put below each lesson. And I also launched bitcoinresources.com a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still working on that as well. It's related to each other. So the best articles and books and podcast episodes I plan to put there. And I work on that like 1 or 2 hours every day, and I plan to release periodic updates very soon. And I'm working on 2 further articles, actually 3, but yeah.
You're a busy guy.
Yeah, I really love what Brandon Quidham did with the mushroom analogy. And I really love what Ralph Merkle said about Bitcoin, that it is a living organism. And I think it's an awesome way to look at it. And I want to write my own take on Bitcoin as a biological organism. I don't know where it will go yet. I have a rough outline, but and many ideas, but
we're excited to hear it.
I don't know how long it will take me to flesh it out. And since you your previous question was if I see any narratives as dangerous, or if I see anything in the future. I'm also working on an article. I've been working for that for quite a long time, but I didn't get around to really write it. I'm just collecting ideas and working on the outline. And this will probably be called "How to Kill Bitcoin: A Practical Guide," and that should be a fun one as well.
Oh my God. That's awesome, actually. You know what? No, because it's true, right? That's like part of being a maximalist is that like, and I'm desperately like trying to let you get back to your life, but I just enjoy talking to you so much. But it's like, that's like part of being a maximalist is that like every day I wake up and I try to destroy Bitcoin and every day I can't. So I go buy more, you know? It's like, every day I can't kill it.
That's the circle of life of a Bitcoin maximalist.
It's like, it's the only one where you can't destroy any of the ideas and you're like, all right, I give up today. I'm going to go back to this tomorrow. Okay. So, let me, if anybody wants to reach out to you, how do they, or actually even before that, any final thoughts for the listeners?
Any final thoughts?
Final thoughts, anything.
Like I said in the beginning, I think the most important thing is to have fun with everything. I mean, since we are on Fun with Crypto, just, play around with the stuff and try to look at it from a new perspective. Try to set up some nodes. I just set up my second or third Raspberry Pi with the newest version of Raspberry Blitz, and it's awesome. It's so much fun to just play around with it, and yeah, just have fun and don't dismiss it. You will dismiss Bitcoin at your peril.
Oh, I totally agree. Okay, so I'm gonna post a link in the show notes to your website and post a link to your contact details. And of course, I just I want to thank you so much for coming on. And I'd actually love to have you on again. So, Dergigi,
sure, anytime.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. And if someone wants to reach out to me, my DMs are open. I'm Dergigi on Twitter, and I'm basically on Twitter all the time. So it's your best bet on catching me there.
Thank you again. Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
I hope everybody enjoyed our interview discussion with Dergigi. I had a really, really great time. I'm going to, like I said, post a link to his website and contact information in the show notes. If you want to reach me, you can find me on Telegram or Twitter. I'm at CoinIcarus. If you want to reach me by email, it's funwithcrypto@protonmail.com. Thank you all for listening, and catch you all next time.